image could happen to one of their parents?
Kids like my own kids, like the kids in my church, are afraid that that could happen to their parents when they speak out.
And let's remember that an ICE agent specifically told a protester, have y'all not learned from the past couple of days? This is just 2 days after Renee Good was shot. That is being told to people on the ground in Minneapolis and across the country, across Minnesota, and it's not acceptable. We should be clear here. This violence does not make us safer. It does not address fraud, waste, and abuse. It doesn't help families with health care, does not grow or build small businesses, and it certainly, as we're continuing to discuss, is not preventing the kind of fraud that Republicans are discussing here today. Now, Governor, can you walk us through specifically how Operation Metro Surge affected Minnesota's ability to investigate actual fraud?
Well, thank you, Congressman. Well, first of all, as I said, we've been partners with the federal, our federal partners, whether that be the FBI or be the U.S. Attorney's Office, which I will note was one of the premier U.S. Attorney's Office, regardless of who they were appointed by. Right now, those lead investigators and basically that whole team has left that office. They've not been filled back in. The U.S. Attorney himself was in front of a federal judge yesterday on contempt issues of that office not working together. Now, look, we're going to prosecute, as we have, every single person that's involved in fraud, but we can't do it alone. The Attorney General's office is doing everything they can. He has consistently come and asked the legislature for more money, more of the investigators he needs. But right now is the backlog at the U.S. Attorney's Office is being challenged by the federal courts. It makes it more difficult for us to get those cases over to them. But the good news is the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is continuing to do those. We got a conviction this week. Those are things that'll continue on. And while we need to put in all the safeguards, we need to, as you heard the Attorney General's opening statement, if we partner together in this, our chance of defeating this fraud is that much higher. But right now, it's stymied. There's no investigators over there. There's no U.S. attorneys. The FBI has been decimated, and it's very difficult.
And that right there, the American public needs to hear. I mean, it's completely outrageous what's happened to those that are actually trying to take on fraud in Minnesota and across the country. Those offices have been decimated, and there's no support, not acceptable. And Governor, finally, there appears to be actually no evidence that ICE and DHS reign of terror in Minnesota that continues has actually prevented any fraud. Is that your assessment, sir?
That's correct. What you saw on the streets didn't do anything to it. And we've actively asked if you have folks who can help us, if you have folks who are good at the forensics, if they can help us do this, we want you there, as we have for the last 7 years that I've been governor. We partnered together and convicted people.
Thank you. And with that, I also, just for the record, want to introduce our report as well. Today, the Democratic staff released it as well as far as relates to this hearing and Operation Metro Surge. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes our Majority Whip, Representative Emmer from Minnesota.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. And actually, thank you, Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison, for appearing before the committee today. Gentlemen, let's see if we can agree on at least one thing today. Today's hearing is titled Oversight of Fraud and Misuse of Federal Funds in Minnesota. Can we agree that this fraud is a serious thing, Governor Walz? Yes or no? Can we agree on that?
Yes, any fraud is serious.
Thank you. Because it's interesting that you and I agree that it's a serious thing, considering the man sitting next to you, your Attorney General Keith Ellison, just 2 months ago said, quote, "This is a political matter. This is not a serious thing," end quote. Attorney General Ellison, is there an organized crime ring operating in Minnesota? I'll answer for you, sir. Governor Walz believes there is an active crime ring in our state. In October, the governor said, quote, "We've got an organized crime ring in Minnesota. I think it's been going on for years." Moving on, Mr. Ellison, I, along with millions of Americans, have grave concerns over your alleged relationships with Somali fraudsters who have since been charged and convicted of federal crimes. I'm sure you are aware that over 90% of the defendants charged in the Feeding Our Future fraud case are of Somali descent. In fact, you have personal knowledge of these people. There's a 54-minute audio tape of your meeting with these criminals in December of 2021. And during your meeting, they complained to you about increased scrutiny of their nonprofits, and you told them, quote, "Of course I'm here to help," end quote. It's on the internet. Anyone can listen to you say that. Since then, you claim you were not aware of their crimes in the $250 million Feeding Our Future scheme, the largest pandemic fraud case in the nation. But just weeks after your December 2021 meeting, the FBI executed search warrants that you never would have requested in the Feeding Our Future fraud investigation. Now let's fast forward to September of 2022, 10 months after you met with the Somali fraudsters. Your office issued a press release stating, quote, "Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison and his office have been deeply involved for 2 years in holding Feeding Our Future accountable," end quote. So according to your office, sir, you have been deeply involved in the Feeding Our Future case since September of 2020. That actually sounds like you are saying that at the time of your infamous meeting with the Somali fraudsters, you were already aware of the allegations of fraud. When you had this meeting in December 2021, did you know, sir, about the long-running FBI investigation into Feeding Our Future? Yes or no?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Representative Emmer.
Reclaiming my time. When did you personally become aware of the FBI investigation? That's all I'm asking.
Representative Emmer, as you know, I have addressed this issue many times.
All right. Reclaiming my time. In that same meeting with the fraudsters, Mr. Attorney General, you took aim at the Minnesota Department of Education. You stated that the Minnesota Department of Education had fought the nonprofit in very disgusting ways, in a very racist, xenophobic, and Islamophobic manner. You actually asked for the names of all these folks who are just hung up and offered to call the Minnesota Department of Education to, quote, demand some explanations. We now know that when you made these comments, the Biden DOJ was working with the Minnesota Department of Education and that their work exposed the massive fraud ring. Pretty bad look for you, sir. Either you were oblivious to what was going on under your nose, or worse, you were trying to obstruct the work of the Minnesota Department of Education. So I can see the time is getting short. Mr. Chairman, we are left with two questions. One, what did Governor Walz and Keith Ellison know about the fraud? And two, when did they actually know it? I would suggest that if they do not give direct and truthful answers to both these questions at this hearing, then they both need to be put under oath in a deposition. This is a serious thing, Mr. Attorney General. You are the only one who thinks protecting taxpayer dollars is political. Mr. Ellison, my concern is that you actively obstructed this investigation in exchange for campaign donations, a quid pro quo. If these concerns are proven to be true, you should be disbarred and you should go to jail. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is critical that the federal government support people who need assistance with food, housing, and health care. Unfortunately, as long as the government provides these services, there will be bad actors trying to take advantage of them. We need to prevent and identify these fraudsters so that social services can reach those who need them. However, we cannot recklessly deny help to many people who need services because of a few bad actors. My Republican colleagues have now held 2 hearings to talk about fraud in one single state, but they have completely ignored the fact that the Trump administration is the most corrupt administration in history. If Republicans really cared about fraud, abuse, and holding criminals accountable, they would call them out. Donald Trump for firing 17 inspectors general. These internal watchdogs are the front line of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse of federal agencies. The Trump administration has also retaliated against whistleblowers and allowed administration officials to engage in serious conflicts of interest that often cross the line into outright corruption. We need inspectors general, whistleblower protections, and rules prohibiting conflicts of interest to protect federal programs and make sure that people can get the services they need. Across the country, Americans are struggling to afford their health care, premiums, and groceries. The Trump administration should be strengthening the social safety net, not cutting the safeguards that catch the fraudsters taking advantage of it. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison. My questions are going to be simple and direct. Governor Walz, you were inaugurated as governor on January 17th, 2019, and have served in that role through 2 terms ever since, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
During the time period 2019 and 2020, while you were serving as governor, isn't it true that state auditors and officials raised concerns about fraud and vulnerabilities in programs overseen by your administration?
I can't confirm that, but I'm assuming we have always ongoing OLA.
I'll take that as a yes. Those warnings were communicated to senior officials in your administration, including yourself, correct?
I can't speak if it was directly.
I think the correct answer to that would also be yes. Despite those warnings, you did not order a broad stop payment or suspension of payment in any program at that time, correct?
We're not going to stop payments of feed children until we have the proof that things happen. In 2019, we did start taking action. I went to the legislature.
Okay. Governor Walz, when fraud concerns were raised early in your tenure in the Child Care Assistance Program, did your administration stop payments at that time?
The Child Care Assistance Program and
the answer is no. When fraud concerns were
raised,
would you
like me to answer or not?
Well, it's yes or no.
I want you to help.
You've already answered the question. You said you didn't ever stop payments, and that's what the problem is, and that's what the Democrats are complaining about. Oh my gosh, Trump stopped payments. Well, my God, you lost billions to fraud in Minnesota. That's what this hearing's about.
Chairman,
you didn't stop payments because you didn't want to rock the boat. And when fraud concerns were raised, Chairman. When fraud concerns were raised in Medicaid, home and community-based services, did your administration stop payments? No, you did not. When fraud concerns were raised in non-emergency medical transportation, did your administration stop payments?
Chairman, if I could mention what a stop payment meant by what the administration did last week is 400,000 children without health care. Are you stopping payment if one person?
We believe that's your fault and the Attorney General's fault, because you do nothing about fraud, even though everyone in America sees
our Medicare error rate is lower than your state.
Fraud. You have been defrauded. You have not been good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And the Democrat position is, well, keep the money flowing. The American taxpayers have had enough.
I think that's a fair characterization.
They want their taxpayer dollars spent wisely. We all support social programs.
That's not a fair characterization.
But if you're going to waste the money to fraudsters, then we have to stop and recalculate.
We're not. We're putting them in jail when we can, Chairman. And some of these programs are crafted in such a way that there's a procedure to follow. And I'm with you. $1 is too much. I don't think there's a lot of difference here if you want to help us get at this. The question is it a sledgehammer? Is it a scalpel? I understand there's no political upside.
Well, let's get into what we've talked. You eventually did pause payments in certain programs, but that wasn't until late 2025 after the federal government stepped in. Is that correct?
I don't think that's a fair characterization of stepped in. We've been partners in this and working on them, but
let's move on. And that decision occurred only after large-scale fraud had already taken place for years. Now, Governor Walz, employees inside state agencies raised concerns about fraud and improper payments for years. Is that correct?
Inside agencies, we've been prosecuting them for years. Yes.
They have raised concern. Agencies have raised concern about fraud in Minnesota, correct?
Each of those Yes, when they do and they're prosecuted.
Some
yes.
some of those employees faced retaliation after raising those concerns. Is that correct?
That is not correct, Chairman.
Okay.
Minnesota has strong whistleblower protections.
Attorney General Ellison, you are the chief legal officer of the state of Minnesota, correct?
Yes.
Your office advises agencies on compliance with federal and state law, correct?
Yes.
Retaliation against whistleblowers reporting fraud is unlawful, correct?
That is right.
At any point during your tenure, did you tell state agencies to stop payments due to credible fraud allegations? Yes or no?
Sir, we prosecuted over 300 people in the Medicaid fraud area.
300, I would predict is a drop in the bucket, but you've never said to stop payments. That's
it's one of the highest rates in the country, sir.
Well, you have one of the highest fraud rates in the country in Minnesota.
That's not true. And my office doesn't have the authority to do a stop payment. Right. We prosecute criminals when they're presented us by the agency.
So the answer is no, unfortunately. No one's ever from your office said to stop payments until we can get the fraud under control. So to summarize, you both knew about fraud, risk, and payments continued. Our investigation has shown that whistleblowers who were alerted about the widespread fraud were ignored, sidelined, and even retaliated against. Only after federal authorities ultimately stepped in did you take any action. It's not this committee's responsibility to decide guilt or dole out punishment, but it's clear there was a massive failure of oversight and, quite frankly, a failure of leadership. One wonders whether either of you should bear some personal responsibility for the billions of dollars siphoned off by fraudsters under your noses in the state that you led. Again, this isn't for the committee to decide, but based on your answers today and apparent failure to take any responsibility, still the answer to that question has become abundantly clear. And now
Mr. Chair, I seek unanimous consent to enter items into the record.
All right, before I recognize Mr. Lynch, Ms. Randall, you have a UC?
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a November 12th, 2025 article from ProPublica entitled How Trump Has Exploited Pardons and Clemency to Reward Allies and Supporters, which shows President Trump rewards those in his good graces. I also seek recognition to insert into the record a Washington Post article from December 19th, 2025 entitled Trump's Pardons Wipe Out Payments to Defrauded Victims, which shows that President Trump lets criminals and fraudsters walk free. And I also seek unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from May 29th, 2025 from ABC News titled Trump's Flurry of Pardons Includes Some to Campaign Contributors.
And Miss Presley, we'll do one at a time. We'll go to Mr. Lynch, then I'll recognize you. Mr. Lynch from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, good to see you, my friend. Attorney General Ellison, good to see you again. Reverend, thank you for your willingness to testify before the committee. I want to shift gears here a minute, and I want to focus on ICE. So I was recently asked to serve as the co-chair of the 5-for-26 soccer tournament. It's a global tournament, the largest sporting event in the world. And my home city of Boston has been asked to host a lot of the games. In Boston, we'll host teams from Morocco, Ghana, Bolivia, Iraq, Scotland, France, England, and Suriname. We'll also host over 3 million foreign national visitors who are coming into Boston for these tournaments. And we recently learned from the Trump administration that ICE will play a key role in the security operations during those games. So we've got all these people flying in, foreign nationals, a lot of different countries, South America and elsewhere. Governor, since you've had direct and relevant experience on dealing with the Metro surge and the security operations of ICE, I was interested in getting your thoughts and your observations and any recommendations you might have to help us with confronting our experience or what we expect to see during these games with ICE coming in, as well as so many foreign visitors.
Well, as I think the world saw, and don't take my word for it, take professional law enforcement across Minnesota and across the country, the most unprofessional, aggressive force that I think you could imagine. And I was here in front of this committee and answered all your questions on June 12th. And I warned this committee what a masked group of folks turned loose in an American city could do. And I'm not, if I'm not mistaken, I said someone could get killed doing this. And I just want to be very clear about this. When Tom Homan had to come in to clean up the mess of Secretary Noem and Greg Bovino, Secretary Homan himself acknowledged Minnesota follows the law, exactly as I told you in this committee. So my advice to you, Mr. Lynch, is to get very public upfront commitments from these folks. While I disagree with Mr. Holman's views on many things, he's at least professional enough that he pulled the leash back and pulled these folks out of Minnesota after, again, misrepresenting the number of people they were detaining, misrepresenting before he got there exactly what Minnesota did. And I'm just going to name it on accountability. The Secretary of DHS being chastised by Republican senators added insult to injury to Minnesota, pouring salt in the wounds of the parents of Alex Preddy and Renee Good's family by not even apologizing or acknowledging. And if you want accountability, for the one of the times, as far as I know, the attorneys know better, we are not being included in the investigation. And the actions that were taken of a gentleman who was shot in the leg was the night that Kristi Noem called me a domestic terrorist and said that this gentleman was attacking federal agents. Well, now we know the story. They lied. They are now under investigation, they being the federal agents. So look, I'm with you. I want your help on fraud. Why would I not want money to go to the programs I care deeply about, feeding people, clothing people, housing people? But what ICE did disrupted everything that we were doing. It disrupted our federal partners. And it forced our law enforcement agencies, who have worked hard to gain the public trust, to have the public believe in them. So my advice to you is, and especially when the world's coming to see this, let Boston's finest lead. Let the people of Massachusetts lead. Let the 10th Amendment stand for something and allow us to be able to do this. The people of Minnesota will hold us accountable if they don't feel we're doing a good enough job. But to demonize and retribution against a state, in the words of the president, in the words of the vice president, have done nothing. So, Mr. Lynch, the world should be looking forward to coming, but I would get it up front, and I would make sure that Boston's police department are in the lead.
Thank you. Attorney General Ellison, we need coordination between law enforcement agencies. This is a big job. What are your views on that likelihood of cooperation from ICE?
Well, I hope you get the cooperation that you need. In Minnesota, we don't have a good record of cooperation, which is interesting because so many times in the past, we have had great cooperation between local federal enforcers and local state ones, and we've just worked seamlessly. Nowadays, that has all changed, and that's quite unfortunate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you for the courtesy.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Presley.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a February 2026 letter from 200 state lawmakers urging Congress to exercise its oversight authority and demand the administration immediately restore full child care funding that it had frozen for 5 states.
Without objection, it's ordered. Chair recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here. Governor, you've reminded people that you were here last June. At that time, I reminded you that the Feeding Our Future scam made Minnesota ground zero for the largest COVID-19 fraud scheme in the nation. $250 million in federal taxpayer funds were taken out of the mouths of hungry children, and as the FBI noted, they were, quote, funneled into luxury homes, cars, and lavish lifestyles while families struggled. You assured me then that you wholeheartedly supported the federal government's effort to bring those responsible to justice. I appreciate your sentiment, but a person's actions matter more than their words. Governor Walz, when did you first become aware of the fraud in Feeding Our Future? A specific date, please.
Well, Congressman, it's good to see you. And having served in your job for 12 years, I can tell you my job is a little different as governor. For 7 years, I take a lot of meetings. I certainly wouldn't specifically state, but I think during that pandemic, I think by late 2020, we started to see the irregularities. They were flagged. And I will note that we cooperated.
State officials State officials were aware of the fraud in early 2020.
So you're asking when I, in my office, the
Yes.
governor became good, and I don't have a specific date.
Okay.
But what I would say is we provided witnesses, documents, the U.S. Attorney and the FBI, and 79 of those people have been prosecuted going back to 2022.
Okay. Well, when I was chair of the Committee on Education and the Workforce, I issued you a subpoena in September 2024 because you and your administration were not forthcoming about how your administration, quote, failed to identify what has been described as the largest pandemic fraud in the nation, end quote. In September 2024, you were aware of the Feeding Our Future fraud and your administration's handling of it, correct? Yes or no?
2024? Yes, by that time we had already put people in jail
Okay.
and had extensively investigated.
This committee has testimony that the Minnesota Department of Education briefed your office about the Feeding Our Future's draft lawsuit and litigation hold on April 28th, 2020. Let me jog your memory. Is that correct?
I can't speak specifically to that. And
Okay.
if it's
It
my
was April 2020. That means Feeding Our Future received a total of over $200 million in federal funds after you and your administration knew about the fraud concerns. Why didn't you stop sending money to Feeding Our Future as soon as the fraud concerns were raised?
Congressman is following the program. We notified USGA under the Trump administration's first term. We had notified them too because it's a program administered out of USDA, and they were working to work through the process.
Didn't you say you were fearful of political retaliation?
No, I never said any such
founder?
thing. I never said any such thing.
Well, that's what we understood. You were afraid of political retaliation. So, given the size and scope of the Feeding Our Future's fraud, I think you and your administration would have been on high alert looking for additional fraud in the state. But after seeing the handling of Feeding Our Futures and its $250 million in fraud, it came as no surprise to learn that even more staggering amounts of fraud, estimated at up to $9 billion, were uncovered in the Child Care Assistance Program, the Minnesota Medicaid program, and other programs. How could you allow such massive fraud schemes in your state to get to this point?
Congresswoman, we don't see anything by 9 million. Local press and everyone reports it about 300 million. But as I've said, if it's $1, it's too much. But we started in 2019 putting anti-fraud programs forward. After Feeding Our Future, we started going through and making sure every program had the integrity in it that it needed. And that's why you see convictions. That's why you see these
Why
programs
did it take nearly 7 years for you to get engaged to stop the fraud? 7 years.
We started in 2019, Congresswoman. It may be a surprise. If you arrest someone for stealing a car, other people are still going to try and steal cars. What we've tried to do is bring program integrity. But I'll go back to this. We're not going to shut down programs that have things that are going well in it. And we need to find that proper balance. And I've acknowledged that every year we're putting things in place and inspectors.
Governor Walz, you did not do your job. You did not do your job. You did not protect taxpayer dollars. You allowed massive fraud. You and Mr. Ellison allowed massive fraud to go on in the state of Minnesota. And it is unfortunate, as somebody said, that you can't be held personally responsible at this stage of the game. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Christian Morte from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Governor Walz, you've seen firsthand the brutal excessive force used by ICE and CBP agents in Minnesota. Unfortunately, we saw the same tactics employed in Chicago during Operation Midway Blitz. I want to turn now to ICE and CBP's horrific pattern of abuse. Secretary Noem went to our cities ostensibly under the guise of arresting, quote, the worst of the worst. But in Illinois, less than 3% of those arrested during Operation Midway Blitz had criminal histories. In Minnesota, the vast majority of those detained had never been in trouble with the law, correct?
I believe that's correct, Congressman.
There were also more than 170 cases this year where ICE and CBP detained U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens should never be detained by ICE, correct?
That is correct.
According
I would
to
hope we all could agree on that.
Well, I hope so too. According to the Chicago Sun-Times, federal agents have pepper sprayed children, including this 1-year-old baby in Chicago. And children should never be pepper sprayed, right?
I would hope we could all agree on that too. They should not.
And according to The Independent, CBP agents dragged a 67-year-old U.S. citizen out of his car, breaking his ribs and causing internal bleeding. No person should be subjected to that kind of treatment, right?
They should not, Congressman.
Attorney General Ellison, let me turn to another topic. In President Trump's second term, ICE has become America's highest funded federal law enforcement agency with a budget of more than $85 billion. If ICE were an army, this budget would make it the 13th largest army in the world. Let's look at where that money has gone. Last year, DHS spent $172 million on 2 private luxury jets for Secretary Noem. I assume you're not aware of a stop payment on that particular payment, right?
No, I'm not, sir.
Republican Senator John Kennedy yesterday grilled Secretary Noem about a $220 million ad campaign featuring her prominently, including on this horse in front of Mount Rushmore. Secretary Kennedy suggested this was wasteful spending, and I agree. I assume you'd agree with that as well, right?
I do.
This gross misuse of funds must end now, and Secretary Noem must be held accountable. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Chicago was ground zero for Secretary Noem's overreach when she launched Operation Midway Blitz. Chicago media reported that ICE and CBP agents had pepper sprayed a 1-year-old baby, shot at a pastor, harassed seniors, tased U.S. citizens, and even killed a person. It's clear that Midway Blitz was never intended to make Chicago safer. In December, ICE and CBP began Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota. Over 3,000 agents were sent to one state. There were military-style raids at child care centers. Children kept home from school. Adults postponing medical care. In Minneapolis, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, both U.S. citizens, were fatally shot by federal officers. It's clear that Operation Metro Surge was never intended to make Minnesota safer. But this is not isolated to just Illinois and Minnesota. Inside detention centers across the country, the suffering continues. Detainees report physical and sexual abuse, medical neglect, and pressure to self-deport. On top of that brutality, Kristi Noem is misusing funds to buy herself private jets and enrich her associates. Kristi Noem is testifying in the House Judiciary Committee today, but she must come before this committee to explain the rampant corruption and waste within her agency. DHS is out of control. There is no congressional oversight. I was denied entrance to ICE facilities twice in Illinois. There's no accountability. Secretary Noem has still not appeared before this committee, nor has she responded in a substantive manner to more than 12 letters I've sent her. There are no consequences. Noem is still the leader of DHS despite regularly breaking the law and abusing her authority. Secretary Noem must answer for her wrongdoing. For Jaime, my State of the Union guest, who raises his little sister after his father was coerced into self-deportation. For Chicagoan Marimar Martinez, who was shot 5 times. For my constituent Evelyn, an 18-year-old U.S. citizen who was wrongfully detained by ICE. For Renee Good, Alex Preddy, and Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, and all the other victims of ICE and CBP. For the American people. It's for all those reasons that, Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Clause 2K6 of House Rule 11, I move to subpoena Kristi Noem to testify before the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. This is for every family impacted by Kristi Noem's terror campaign. They demand answers, and so do I.
A motion has been made. The committee will hold this motion in abeyance until the end of today's hearing. The committee will now proceed with today's hearing, and I want to remind everyone, I believe Kristi Noem's testifying in front of the Homeland Security Committee in the House today after testifying in the Senate yesterday. Chair, before I recognize Mr. Cloud, I believe Mr. Higgins has a UC.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an interview from 2024, December 2024, the Minnesota Star Tribune with Governor Walz, noting the federal investigation into the Early Intensive Developmental and Behavioral Intervention program, the EIDBI program serving autism patients. Since its first year of inception in 2017, growing from 1.7 million per year to over 400 million per year. Unanimous consent.
Yes, sir. Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Cloud from Texas.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. This hearing was designed to be a hearing looking into the massive expansion of some of the social programs and the fraud that was contained therein. But Reverend Togard, I was struck by part of your opening statement because you invoked Matthew 25, and that's a scripture we see tossed around a lot up here, but often without context. And so I went and got my Bible and thought we'd dig into Matthew 25 for a minute. The scripture you invoked was Matthew 25, 35 through 40. It ends with this. It says, "Then the righteous will answer to him, Lord, when did we see you hungry, feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did to one of those brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did this to me." I would ask you, who's the you in that passage?
Thank you for your question. You, meaning all of us, the followers of Christ.
Followers of Christ, right. In Matthew 24:3, it says, after Jesus was sitting on the Mountain of Olives and the disciples came to him privately, and then they asked him, that began this whole chapter. Now, what Christ didn't say was to lobby your government. He said, if you have, you give. That's the general biblical principle here. 2 Corinthians chapter 9 gives us probably the best scriptural understanding of what charity is. It says, each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly, under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Would you say that taxes are under compulsion?
Taxes are not my area of expertise, but
But are they given under compulsion? Do you pay your taxes?
As a U.S. citizen, I pay my taxes.
Yes, because what happens if you don't?
We don't have the services that we need to support our.
What happens to you personally if you don't pay your taxes?
You get in trouble.
You get in trouble. I would say that's under compulsion. So if we're talking about what charity is, I'm always amazed in DC how much of we get to define our personal worth as a politician or statesman or whatever you want to call us by how much of other people's money we give away. And so there's certainly a place for a social safety net potentially, but the idea that Matthew 25 is kind of used as a blanket statement. As a matter of fact, the parable that it gives right before that scripture that you go into is the parable of the talents, where you see someone, a business owner, go away and he leaves 3 employees in charge and gives them each a bit of investment. And 2 of them turn their investment into a profit. And one that turns it not into a profit, he does nothing with it, just sits on it. What does he call him? You're a pastor, right?
Yes, I am, sir. I don't have.
He calls him a wicked and a lazy servant. And so, scripturally speaking, God expects us to do something with what he's given us. Now, Romans 13 talks about the purpose of government. Scripture is replete with, there's different institutions that each have a different thing. The primary job of raising our kids and taking care of our families and the institution of the family. The government has a different one. It says, for the one in the authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For the rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants to bring agent of wrath on the wrongdoer. Would you say that someone who commits fraud is doing wrong?
We all are against fraud.
Right. Is fraud theft? Would you agree that that's theft?
Yes.
As the 8th commandment says, thou shalt not steal. Would you recommend that someone in your church go into debt to give an offering in your church?
No.
Okay, so we have a massive program of fraud that's being paid for by taxpayers, and it's not really us paying it, it's really our kids and our grandkids that are paying it. And yet we continue to see this massive expansion, all under the taken out of context of what charity is being defined as. It's interesting. I find it odd that the left continues to bring up Matthew 25, because at the very beginning of that, right before he goes in that scripture that we talked with, it says, Matthew 25:32, all the nations will be gathered to him, and he will separate the people from one another as sheep and goats. He will put the sheep on his right and his goats on the left. And the king will say to those on his right, come in, you are blessed of the Father, take your inheritance to the kingdom. And those on his left, he will say, depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So I would caution those who begin to use Matthew 25 to do so in the proper context, understanding that we have multiple biblical institutions and they each have a purpose.
The context here is vast.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit the entirety of Matthew 25 into the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I also have a unanimous consent item.
Without object, does anyone object to?
Thank you. It's a Huffington Post.
I didn't recognize you yet, Mr. Does anybody object to Mr. Cloud? Without objection, so ordered. Now I'll recognize Ms. Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Comer. I'd like to enter into the record an article from the Huffington Post yesterday. Troops being told Trump's been anointed by Jesus to cause Armageddon in Iran.
Without objection, so ordered. Well, we do want it. Let's recognize Mr. Connor, then I'll get Mr. Wakshaw. Mr. Connor from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Walz, when I went to Minneapolis and was at Alex Preddy's memorial, I was struck that by the people there. I expected a lot of folks who were immigrants, and I expected or folks who were children of immigrants who looked brown like me. And there at the memorial were fourth and fifth generation Minnesotans, most of them white Americans, talking about how they faced tyranny, how when they go to church, they were being followed by ICE agents. When they go to give a meal to an immigrant, they were being followed by agents. And I just had so much hope for our country seeing them there. And I want to thank Minnesota as a Californian, as someone who grew up in Pennsylvania, as an American, for their character, for their courage, for what they have modeled in a multiracial democracy. And my question for you, having served as a congressman, a governor, what is it about Minnesota that we can learn? What is it that leads to this kind of inclusive feeling about immigrants in our nation?
Well, thank you, Congressman, and thanks for your work on many fronts. Look, I think Reverend Tolgard summed it up in getting at the heart of this. It's about the neighborliness and the care. And left to our own devices, I'm going to make the case, Minnesota, and by the way, I would remind folks, states have to balance their budgets. We're AAA bond rated, one of the states that's ranked the highest. We have a surplus, and we also have the highest rainy day funds, one of the strongest protections. So we understand fiscal responsibility, but we also understand this caring, this neighborliness. People saw their neighbor. I believe our politics can change with that idea of what the next door neighbor looks like. Now, I will have to tell you, Mr. Khanna, I was deeply concerned last year when the Vice President of the United States mentioned he can understand why people wouldn't want to live by somebody who's not like them, which seems to go against our entire ethos in Minnesota, whether it was the first wave of Norwegian and Swedish immigrants that came to Minnesota, German immigrants like my family, or whether it was Hmong coming after the Vietnam War, or Somali and other East African immigrants to our country. And I think it's this sense of working together. There's a reason that we rank at the top in healthcare. We rank at the top in personal incomes. We rank near the top in home ownership. We rank near the top in happiness. Because this idea that we're all in it together and that we believe everybody should have a chance. So I think it's an ethos, and it gets into our politics on the secular side. I believe as an elected official that I shouldn't give a sermon, but I should attempt to live one. And one of our politicians, Paul Wellstone, talked about we all do better when we all do better. And that's what we do. And I know that is true to a certain degree in other states, but I see folks making the claim that, well, you wouldn't have any fraud if you just cut all these programs, if you just zeroed them out. That is true. If we did not provide food for our children, no one would steal from that program. But there would also be a lot of hungry children. And what I'm asking for and acknowledging the accountability, we need to put program integrity in. So I think it's a neighborliness. I think it's a historical point about caring for your own. And I think it's a clear understanding that if your neighbor does better, you're going to do better.
Well, thank you, Governor. And obviously, fraud matters and budgets matter. But what really matters right now in this country are values. And I really appreciate your sharing that. Attorney General Ellison, in the brief time I have, I just want to be clear about Somali Americans. Because when I was growing up as an Indian American, anytime someone who was of Indian origin did something wrong, every Indian American was concerned, you know, and I don't think people understand that. If you aren't a minority, how that makes you feel. I understand there were 80 or 90 people who were Somali Americans who were involved in this, but there are 100,000 Somali Americans, at least in Minnesota. And statistically, from all the studies I've seen, it is just factually untrue that Somali Minnesotans or Somali Americans commit more fraud than white Americans or Indian Americans or other Americans. And could you just speak to this, because it is so dangerous? And I don't even think on the other side people are doing that on purpose. But if you aren't an immigrant, if you haven't lived that or a child of immigrants, you don't know what that makes you feel. And can you talk about the Somali experience in Minnesota?
No, the reality is the Somali community in Minnesota has brought great things to our state. They have opened businesses. They've gotten professional degrees. They are great neighbors who volunteer and help their neighbors. They have been a benefit to our state. If you pick out a few people who've done wrong, sure, you can do that. But I can guarantee you, you can do that in any ethnic group at all in the state of Minnesota or anywhere in America.
Thank you. Thank you both.
All right, before I recognize Mr. Higgins, I'll recognize Mr. Walkinshaw for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I just wanted to make a quick correction. You said Secretary Noem is before the Homeland Security Committee today. That's not true. I'm a member of the committee. She was with us a couple months ago, but not scheduled. With that, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a September 22nd, 2025 article from Reuters titled "Trump Aide Homan Accepted $50,000 in Bribery Sting Operation," which shows the Trump administration is willing to cover up blatant corruption of its officials.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Higgins for Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, ma'am, thank you for being here today. Governor, when you took office, this fraud had already begun. Is that an accurate assessment?
That's accurate, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Higgins.
So what we're trying to get our heads wrapped around here as a nation, and we're doing our best as a committee, I'm quite certain on both sides, to just sort of focus our attention on what needs to be focused on. You had massive fraud in the state of Minnesota. And when we started looking into waste, fraud, abuse, and theft across the country, Minnesota surfaced as a wow moment for the entire country. So naturally, you know, we look as a citizenry to, well, who's in charge there? And my old friend, Governor Walz, is in charge. And the truth is, this fraud had begun before you took office. So it's a reasonable question, Governor. What you're noted in many interviews, I'm not going to go through them ad nauseum. You were aware of this level of fraud and investigations, and yet it seems like nothing was done until the Trump administration reestablished itself in a second term, and we began broad investigations into waste, fraud, abuse, and theft, and Minnesota popped. So would you please, I just give you a minute to respond.
Yeah.
Why didn't you do something sooner? I know some people were put in jail. I know there were investigations, but there was billions and billions and billions of dollars being stolen from a pretty concentrated demographic in your community. And this demographic is a significant political supporter for you and your party, good sir. So I just ask you, please explain.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Higgins. And I appreciate your question in good faith on this. First of all, the issue of billions, and I'll keep saying this, $1 is too many. That number got thrown around. There's nothing behind it, but I will acknowledge $1 is too much. I will also note the characterization.
I would say it's slow. I would say it's slow, but continue.
Well, there's nothing to support that, but look, We will pursue it and assume that that's the case. We will still make the changes we need to make. The characterization that nothing happened until the Trump administration came in is simply not true. We worked with them in the first administration where USDA didn't take action, and I think that's documented. The fact is, starting in 2019, I went to the legislature asking
But you
for—
didn't pause payments, Governor.
The pausing payments—
And the criminal investigation, which I'm running out of time, I want to jump to. The way America sees this, Governor Walz, respectfully, sir, is that this money just continued to flow. There was a high awareness of this waste, fraud, abuse, and theft, like organized crime level theft, and it seemed to be slow rolled, and nobody stopped the money from rolling in. And the money gone, been remitted overseas. Attorney General Ellison, you stated in your opening statement that you sort of stated that your office only has direct jurisdiction over Medicaid fraud. Did you say that in your opening statement? Okay, well, you seem to indicate that you don't have like criminal authority, but you do, don't you? Under your own law, you have an authority if the county district attorney asks you to get involved, or if the governor asks you to get involved, then your office can take lead on any criminal investigation, specifically if you have particular staffing and capabilities within your office, because it's statewide, to look into organized crime. Is that not correct? Okay, so you have the authority to lead your state's effort to respond to this massive fraud at the state level from within the healthcare realm, where government money is being stolen at very, very high levels, unprecedented levels in your state. Are you leading that effort for the state of Minnesota? You're addressing it. Are you leading it? Are you leading the effort?
We are leading the effort to prosecute Medicaid fraud in Minnesota.
I'm not talking about Medicaid fraud. Don't hide behind that. You have the authority to prosecute anything criminally that the governor asks you to. And this thing is big. I'm giving you an opportunity, sir. Are you leading the criminal investigative effort into this massive fraud across the board in the healthcare spectrum in the state of Minnesota or not?
We are following the law. And
you are not leading. You're not leading. I'm going to say, Mr. Chairman, that the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota should resign. I yield.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Before I recognize Mr. Frost, I want to, Mr. Waukesha, you were right. She's not testifying in Homeland Security. Kristi Noem's testifying in Judiciary. I knew she was here somewhere today. So you were right. I misstated the wrong committee. Chair now recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I have unanimous consent called Fraud Focus. Why is Trump granting clemency to convicted fraudsters?
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you all for being here. The whole world has witnessed unprecedented and extreme immigration enforcement tactics this year in Minnesota. After the murder of Renee Nicole Good and before the murder of Alex Preddy, President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social that, quote, "The day of reckoning and retribution is coming." Governor Walz, the dictionary defines retribution as punishment inflicted on someone as vengeance for a wrong or criminal act. Based on what we've seen play out in Minneapolis, what is the problem with the President of the United States directing agents to carry out retribution?
Well, yeah, thank you. And this is certainly troubling because under the guise of fraud, which we all want to tackle, we were subject to, as you saw, the largest invasion of a state by the federal government, I don't know, in certainly any of our lifetimes. And that infliction, to me, we're trying to figure it out. Look, we'll acknowledge, and we're fixing it in Minnesota, but I'm telling you, each of you are going to go back to your state. And if some of you think you want to be governor, you're going to deal with this. And these folks keep moving. The problem is, Congressman, this was about retribution. This was about singling out Minnesota. And I think I'm going to just name it. I think it's singling out because our state works and it provides things for people and we care and we mind our own business and we respect our neighbors. And this retribution had nothing to do with getting the worst of the worst. We know that. It had nothing to do with stopping fraud. And we were subject, we being Minnesotans, for over 10 weeks. And I want to note, just before, and I'll yield back on this, Congressman, I think this is important to note. The gentleman from Illinois noted that Midway Blitz, the damage it did to Chicago. There were 500 agents on the ground in Chicago. Kristi Noem testified yesterday there's still 650 in Minnesota. It is not over. This is not ancient news. This is not looking like everybody moved on. Minnesotans are still experiencing this.
It's bad for our communities and makes our people less safe. It's terrorizing our streets. Yes. Reverend, what has been happening in your community when individuals try to record federal agents?
Thank you for your question. Individuals who have tried to record federal agents have been told they cannot. They have been asked for taken pictures of their license plates. They have been followed. They have been subject to fear intimidation tactics by ICE agents.
And one of the only reasons that really the world knows about what's going on in Minnesota is because of our Constitution and the right to be able to record law enforcement and federal agents. Those videos and the videotapes have been in part the reason why we know what's going on. Trump administration officials have suggested that observing or identifying federal agents is, quote, doxing or, quote, assault. We know federal agents have followed observers to their homes. We know protesters have been pepper sprayed. We know people have been violently detained who were filming them without bystanders having cameras who know how the murders of Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy by ICE agents would have been handled by this administration. They have already tried to lie about these murders, even with footage. After Alex Preddy was murdered, Stephen Miller said he was, quote, a domestic terrorist who tried to, quote, assassinate federal law enforcement. Kristi Noem said that he committed an act of domestic terrorism, and the President of the United States said that he was an agitator and perhaps an insurrectionist. Reverend, the last thing I want to get to that I think is really important. I grew up in the church, and I used to wear one of the "What Would Jesus Do" bracelets, mainly because I used to curse a little too much when I was little, and then I would like snap myself when I cursed. Either way, nowadays I think less about what would Jesus do, and I think more about what would happen to Jesus in this country. And I just wanted to give you a moment to talk about what you think would happen to refugees Mary and Joseph as they come to our border. Would they be separated from their child? I mean, what does this look like?
Such a good point, Congressman. And yes, Jesus was himself a refugee, as were his parents. And yes, I fear that they too would have experienced the harm and cruel treatment that Minnesotans have been experiencing at the hands of our government.
What do you say to the people who hide behind the Bible and wrap themselves in the flag to say that what is going on in our country right now with ICE, terrorizing our communities, ripping our neighbors, ripping families apart? What would you say to people like that?
I think, again, Matthew 25, where are we in this moment? It should be on the side of the least, the widow, the orphan, the hungry, the homeless, and that as people of faith and moral conscience, history will tell what side we stood on, but our actions today will show true love of neighbor.
Thank you. I yield back.
Yields back. Before I recognize Ms. Mace, Mr. Grofman, I believe, has a UC.
Yeah, I'd like to submit for the record.
Hit the button.
I'd like to submit for the record something called Minnesota Financial and Compliance Report on Federally Assisted Programs for the year ending June 30th, 2024.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Ms. Mace from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison, you have presided over one of the worst government fraud scandals in American history. This was money intended to feed hungry children, help kids with autism, provide food and shelter and healthcare to the needy, and more. You both allowed billions in these American taxpayer dollars to be pillaged and plundered by Somali pirates. You knew this was happening. You chose to do nothing about it, and in some cases, you even enabled it. Attorney General Ellison, you even profited from this fraud by taking campaign donations from these Somalians after pledging to help quash the investigation into them. I find your behavior despicable. My questions this morning, my first go to Governor Walz, and I hope you learned some lessons from your last hearing with me on the Oversight Committee. Have you learned anything since
I did, that if I didn't speak up, 2 of my people would be dead, Congresswoman, and I warned you.
Okay, Ms. Governor Walz, what is a woman? Have you learned that lesson? Do you know what a woman is?
I'm the governor of Minnesota, Congressman.
know what a
I'm not
woman
here
is?
to be your prop for your obsession.
So
I
if you
taught middle
can't
school your
define what a
obsession.
woman is, you certainly can't define what fraud is. If you can't even define what a woman is, you can't define fraud. How much money was spent on autism in Minnesota in 2017, Governor?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, Congresswoman.
Did you prepare for this hearing today? Did you
I
do
did.
any preparation
I
for
take
this hearing
Congress
today?
seriously.
And you've seen the numbers about autism fraud in Minnesota. So we're going to do some Minnesota math with you today, okay? Are you ready? How much money was spent on 2017 for autism in Minnesota? How much?
I don't know. I wasn't the governor.
Okay. Did you not just say that you prepared for this hearing today? $1 million, okay? A quick Google search or using your AI could tell you $1 million was spent. How much money was spent on autism in Minnesota in 2024?
I don't have the number in front of me.
Were you governor in 2024?
I was, but I'm not the
Okay,
head
so
of the
your
DHS.
excuse before that you didn't know what 2017 autism numbers were because you were not governor, and today you can't answer the numbers about 2024 as governor, and you still said you prepared for this hearing today. It's unbelievable. $343 million was spent in 2024. What percent increase is that from 1 million to 343 million? What percentage increase is that?
I'm not here to be your prop. Go ahead and tell me.
Well, are you governor of Minnesota or not?
Yes, I am. I'm not.
Well, when
not
I'm
a prop
governor of
for a
South
member of
Carolina,
Congress.
you can sure as hell bet that I'm going to know the math. The math is 34,200% increase, an increase of 343 times what it was in this time period. You know